My brother, though, was the only one who kind of had my back. He'd validate me more
Mm.
because my brother was abused, and I remember my brother was abused in front of me. So that's also why my
Oh,
brother turned to drugs
oh
and
yeah.
really, and had so much anger and needed to just, zone out and just remove himself, disassociate using those drugs. Thank God I said in the beginning, I use sports. Sports saved my life because I
Yes.
probably would have went down the same road as
Hmm.
my brother,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. The three of you are raised in the same family by the same parents,
Hmm.
same kind of
Hmm.
conditions, and it's
Yep.
interesting how we do make different choices. And I remember
Yes.
I didn't do the heavy drugs because I was afraid of them, because I watched my
Hmm.
brother, he's 7 years older than me. So
Hmm.
I watched him, like he started, I think like in eighth grade. So you're like 13, 12, 13 years old.
Hmm.
He started doing
Hmm.
heavy duty drugs. He didn't start with marijuana. I remember, I think he said he started with like reds. Like I think they were, it was pills back then. And it was,
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
what it did, but I remember him saying, I started with that. And so I watched him come home being inebriated and, throwing up everywhere
Mm.
and acting crazy. And it was fearful. It was really scary. And so I
Yeah.
just, I, that, in one sense, I'm kind of glad I experienced that, because honestly, that's where I would have gone. That's exactly, I
Yeah.
know I would have.
Yes.
And I, and
Yes.
I, and I, there was a time where I was dabbling with alcohol, and I talk about it on my
Hmm.
podcast, and I quit for a while. I drink alcohol now, but it's different.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
it had a different, I had a different attitude towards it. And I know I was self medicating,
Hmm.
but I didn't get drunk.
Hmm.
I didn't get drunk.
Hmm.
I wouldn't lose
Hmm.
control. I would get just a
Hmm.
nice buzz going to get that edge off,
Hmm.
and that was
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
I did not allow
Yep.
myself to get drunk, because I didn't want to lose control, because that's what I
Right.
witnessed. I witnessed my brother, and I
Yep.
didn't want to be like that. So,
Sure.
but
Hmm.
I can tell you honestly, I don't think I would be here. Honest to God, I would not
Right.
be here.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I know. I started drinking pretty early myself, and I've been a cannabis user, but nothing hard. Hard
Yeah,
drugs really,
they
really
scared.
scared me.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I did like the worst I did was like I did cocaine a couple of times, and
Hmm.
at first like, ooh, this feels kind of cool, and then like my heart was racing, and
Yeah. Exactly.
I felt like I was losing control. I was like,
Sure.
I
Hmm.
just can't do this. I
Right.
mean, I'm so
Yes.
sensitive to medications anyway. It doesn't take much for
Yep.
me anyway, but
Yep. Yep.
I had other things that I did, and that's one of the things we're going to
Hmm.
kind of talk about a little bit, is the coping behaviors. And I know for me,
Hmm.
eating, you're talking about eating
Hmm.
healthy and everything. I
Hmm.
learned at a very young age to stuff myself with food. That's what I did.
Sure. Absolutely. That's a very common trauma response. And that's also something I work with clients on: eating disorders, disorder eating habits, binge eating. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I remember back then eating and thinking, I'm not hungry. Why am I doing this? But I just did it
Hmm.
anyway. And then of course I put weight on, and then that just started a whole nother
Sure. Yes.
road to
Yep.
go down.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it took, and I carried that behavior into my adult life. And
Hmm.
and I think I'm
Hmm.
going to do a post at some point that I'm going to do the pictures of me through the years of how much I changed,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you can see my weight gain, you can see my weight loss, you can see my weight gain, you can see my weight loss, and you can see
Mm.
me changing through the years. It's really interesting because I physically, not just my weight, but the way I look is different. And I'm actually, this is kind of sound kind of crazy, but I'm actually going back to the look that I had when I was a little girl. It's like I'm going back to the little Lisa.
Interesting.
It's really
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's very telling. That's very, very telling.
it is. And
Yeah.
because I got the picture over there on my desk, and I use it in my my workshop, and I use it in
Hmm.
the podcast. And I looked at it, and
Hmm.
there's several people that have looked, and they're like, oh my God, I could totally tell that's you. Like, that's you now. And and
Uh-huh.
I had enough people say that to me there, where I went, hmm. And then I started looking at the pictures, and then I see this evolution of me. And it's just crazy.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
anyway, I'm just saying,
Yes.
there's different, behaviors, and mine, unfortunately, was the eating.
100%.
Hmm.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think awareness to our coping mechanisms is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Once you have the awareness, like you're able to say like, okay, I see that I'm using food as a scapegoat. I see that I'm using alcohol or drugs or sex or working or shopping or whatever
Yeah.
it is, gambling.
Yeah.
Literally, it's human beings. We want to feel good. Our brain is going to always look for ways to feel good. And trauma, unresolved trauma is going to, is storing itself in your body, in
Yep.
your nervous system.
Yep.
But on a subconscious level, that stuff is going to come out. And I saw it with my brother, and I see it with myself still to this day. And that's why I have to work out. It is
Me
still my
too.
number one thing. It's not running anymore. But the coping mechanism back then for me was running. It was that
Mm-hmm.
high I got from
Mm-hmm.
running. It was the ability to leave my house for hours on end, which was great. Saying I'm going for a run, but I would go for a run, but then I would also stop with my friends and hang
Yeah.
out. Like it
Yeah.
was my way out physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So that became my number one coping mechanism, running. After that, I definitely relied on drinking at some points in my
Mm-hmm.
life, 100%. I was pretty young drinking, and I would say 16 years old, and that definitely throughout college, I was a heavy drinker.
Yeah.
And then it was more cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you have to be able to recognize what you are abusing, because substances, a la carte, aren't necessarily inherently bad.
Right.
It's how we use them.
Right.
So people with more unresolved trauma have a more likelihood of abusing these things, these substances. So other modes that I've used to cope: meditation,
Yeah.
therapy,
Writing.
somatic therapy, writing. Right, when I was young, it was writing, it was
Mm-hmm.
poetry, it was
Mm-hmm.
reading.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't really have those habits anymore. I wish I did. I'm very much distracted, like the rest of the world, with my phone.
Yeah.
But back then, it was my scapegoat. It was running, it was writing, it was reading. So those three pillars really, really were such a very important part of my evolution.